Yeah, you got your short arm and your long arm. See that one's shorter than that one. Now look at, see this right here, this line through your ball joints? Pay attention to that, it's important. And there's your spindle, of course it's your tire and all that, and you got coil springs here. Now four-wheel drive trucks may have this, but they won't have coil springs because they don't have anywhere for the coil springs to be. I mean, because the rear front axles go out, so they're gonna have torsion bars. And that's a long bar that's made like a bolt on each end and it twists. Incidentally, how many of you guys have seen torsion bars? Where you seen? Where's the most recent vehicle you've seen them on? What about that Cadillac? Yeah. You know that Cadillac's got torsion bars on it, that old Eldorado you're working on? Yeah. And the thing I want you to remember about torsion bars, and this is steering and suspension, I'm going to tell you this while I'm thinking about it. If you pull those torsion bars off, you better darn well mark them so that you're putting them back on exactly like they were, because they look just alike when they're laying on the floor, and if you pick the wrong ones up and put them on there backwards or something, then the suspension won't be right, and you may have one side lower than the other and all that. So anytime you're taking the torsion bars out, mark them so you'll know which one's left, which one's right, what's front, what's back. I would actually put right rear and left rear, you know, or maybe an X or something like that, but make sure you can delineate between right and left and front and back with some paint marker, wrap tape around it, do something so when you put them back in there, you're putting them back where they were, because if you don't, you'll be sorry. We've had it happen here. Okay, and we had to go back in there and take the stupid things back out, put them where they're supposed to go. Some of them, like on your later model Chevrolet trucks, are marked on the end of the rod, so you can tell which way they go back. That's something you never think about if you never pull those out before. It's really important because they've got a particular twist number to them. Okay, this is your McPherson Strut. Now, why is McPherson Strut suspension largely better and more widely used now than short long arm suspension? Well, you may have ball joints with a McPherson Strut, but you won't see as many. The steering axis on this is actually going through both of those. The steering axis on this is going through the center of that. On your Honda car is a different deal. The Honda car actually has two ball joints, but it's also got McPherson Strut, and it's got that wishbone. You notice that it's got at the bottom, it's got that wishbone hooking to the lower control arm, and that's really a good deal. Ford Fusions are using that now, and there's some other people are too. It's really a good idea they did that, because on this one here, there's a bearing at the top that holds the weight of the car. And actually the spring, you know, it's turning, you got noises and other things associated with that when this little bearing up here at the top wears out. But when you carry the weight of the car higher in the car body, it lowers your center of gravity and it makes it harder to turn the car over. That's one of the reasons that McPherson Strut was used to begin with, because it's just a more sensible way. You know, I would a whole lot rather be carrying the weight of the car way up in here instead of, you know, having it riding on top of some spring. You know what I'm saying? That makes sense to you? Do you visualizing what I'm talking about? Okay, now then, on this one here, you got a zero reference. Your center line is right here. And there's your zero reference vertical. See that? Now your center line is basically what's going to change that. Like if you ever rode behind a pickup truck or a car and you see it dog dragging down the road crooked, in other words, where, you know, what causes that? What would you do to fix that? Got any idea? What would you do to fix it as far as dog dragging down the road crooked? Somebody brings it to you, hey, my car's going crooked down the road, I have to turn the wheels to the right and just to go straight down the road. What has happened is the rear axle is crooked under the vehicle. That changes what we call the thrust line. You got me? So if you got the rear axle crooked under the vehicle, one time I was driving my old pickup truck that I used to, I had a 74 Ford pickup that I bought back in 78, and whenever I was driving that thing, I ran over some hard potholes in the road, and it sheared the bolt that holds the leaf springs together, and the axle moved crooked under the truck, and suddenly I was having to keep my wheel turned hard to the right to go straight down the road, and the wheels weren't tracking, you know, and so I had to actually get the axle straight under the truck again, and all that. Zero reference vertical is really important too. All right, so you're going to look into that. That's basically straight up and down through the tire. All right, here's your zero reference here. You got positive camber. Now burn this in, guys, because you're going to need to be able to, you know, explain this and understand it, list, define, explain. This is negative. Remember which one's negative and which one's positive, right? The way that I remember that positive is leaning out and negative is leaning in is that, you know, I always think about that old, it's more blessed to give than it is to receive. It's positive to give, right? When you're giving somebody, you're buying their lunch or something, Okay, so this is if it's leaning out, that's positive, and if it's leaning in, that's negative. Now, how does that control the way the car drives? What is one of the things that thing does?
Keeps your steering alignment in check.
No, what it basically does is it wears the tire out on that side. And I got some animations I'll show you in a minute about that. But in addition to everything else, it's going to make it pull in the direction. If you're rolling a tire and it starts to lean off to the left, it rolls off in that direction, doesn't it? I mean, so if the camber is positive or negative, and here's a little rule of thumb that you can write down and put in your notes and burn in. You're always going to pull in the direction of the most positive camber and the most negative caster. Remember that. It's going to, even if it's in the green on your machine, you can adjust it in the green on your machine and think it's okay and then still not be right. So it's causing problems. Now you basically sometimes you have to know how changing the angles is going to change the way the car drives. That's important. The load is projected toward the center of the tire. That's a good thing there. This is a short long arm suspension. Now, I got these images from an old GM handout from years ago. It's one of the best illustrations of this stuff I've ever seen, is how these drawings are done. There's your zero reference right there. There's your load. You notice the load is projected toward the outside of the tire on this one, and that's why it's wearing the tread out. They're actually showing the tread being worn out. All right. Here we go. You got the load projected toward the inside of the tire. There's your 0 degree angle right there. All right. Your trim height. You might notice, some of you guys have already done an alignment, right? On our machine back here. What's one of the first things you see? It actually gives you the specs for that vehicle of what the trim height is supposed to be at every point. It'll give you, and it tells you where to measure it. All right. But we don't typically spend a lot of time measuring those unless we've got a reason to think that's a problem. Your correct trim height is there's your zero reference. Lower control arm, you know, between your frame and there. You notice how that's going to change when you got, you know, negative camber and all that kind of stuff.
Is that a bad spring?
Bad springs can doggone sure make the camber go negative. He's making a good point there. If you've got a weak spring right here, this is naturally going to go negative. And there comes a time in the life of some vehicles where the only way you can correct negative camber is to replace the springs. You can only adjust it so far, and you run out of adjustment, and you got to put new springs on it in order to get it cleaned up. All right, this is theory stuff. On some of the older ones, and I despise doing these kind of alignments like here. Some of the guys really like them. This is the old stuff. They've got shims here, and basically your upper control arm, when you move it in or out, you're changing your camber. Right, so you're going to loosen these bolts and add or subtract shims. Well, you can see how when you've subtracted all your shims and you know what I'm saying? I mean, on some of them, it depends on how they're set up. You got to, the machine out here will give you help for vehicle adjustment. You know, if you're doing one that requires shims, a lot of them have got eccentrics on here instead of the shims. And you know the ones that I really appreciate? The ones, like some of these big Toyotas, the adjustments are done on the bottom control arm. So it's just real easy to stand under the truck and do your camber adjustment. Of course, your caster adjustment's done with these shims too, and I'll tell you more about that in a minute. Adjusting bolts for camber, some of them have got around the base of this here strut, will have slotted holes. Now sometimes, whenever you get ready to do an alignment, you may find out there's an adjustment that's needed and there's no slots. And what you're supposed to do is basically egg shape the slots in these things, or if you're putting new struts on, they'll already be egg shaped. You know, sometimes it just makes sense to sell them a new set of struts if it's got a lot of miles on it anyway. Okay, now this right here is your control arm support tower. You basically got that. Center support sag. There's your springs you're talking about. See, if these springs right here get weak, it's going to cause these wheels to go in. It's just something you're going to do. I'm trying to whip through this pretty quick here. All right. This right here, on some of them, they have you to replace the bushing. You probably won't ever see this. This is an older thing. But these bushings will sometimes have to be replaced because they're squeaking. The rubber will break loose from the metal inside these bushings and it'll go, and people hate that. And we've actually, on some of the later model cars, they do that kind of thing too. Larry, a friend of mine over at Enterprise, has got an upper control arm that's having to be replaced because of the squeaky bushings. There's your positive camber angle. That makes a cone. See, that's what I was talking about. It's going to head off in that direction. Got it? Okay, it's going to pull toward the positive camber. It's going to pull toward the side. See, if that one's leaning over that way, it's going to cause the car to go off you know, toward McDuff's. All right. Now, additional camber to counter road crown. What they did was they put a little bit of camber here on the regular specs because years ago, the roads used to have more slope to them than they do. Like the lane you were supposed to drive in slopes off to the right. And so to keep it from falling away from that crown, like if you lined everything up just straight, it would, you know, be a problem. So what you wanted to do on those was you wanted to line it up so that it would tend to go toward the crown. You got me? And it wouldn't be when you were driving down the road. But nowadays you got 4-lane highways and the highways are completely flat. So everything's changed on that. Okay, this is caster. This is a different angle. Remember caster, you guys put this is looking at the side of the tire, and there's your ball joint stuff going on there. Got me? So here you got vertical reference and your steering axis. The steering axis is actually a line that's drawn through both ball joints. So if you're looking at it from the side, you notice the direction of travel is this way. You're going toward this way. All right. If you've basically got this or that away from vertical, you got two different casters here. Steering axis is going right through the ball joints. You see that? And that's true if you're looking front or side. Your steering axis is right there. All right. Lower ball joint and upper. That's short long arm suspension. That's what SLA stands for. Positive caster right here is basically going to be whenever the bottom one is in front of the back of the top one, right? See that steering axis going through those springs? There's your zero reference, right? All right, you got it? See where I'm going with that? Front, this is some screwed up words here. The front's that way. So basically, the more you've got that steering axis this way, then the more you're going to see the, you have positive caster. Now negative, I'm going to tell you a brief little wheel alignment story. This lady, or these people were driving this 98 Crown Victoria that we have. Let me sign this ticket. All right. Put all that stuff. Here, Woody, here's your belt. But anyway, she's driving this, and the cars without power steering were supposed to have a more negative caster because it makes it easier to steer. You know, imagine yourself, you know those little, if you know the little casters you guys are putting on your benches out there this morning? And if you had one of, like some of them in swivel chairs will have a stem coming off of it, and it sticks up in there. And if you take that thing and you try to go, you know, with it in front of you, with the wheel in front, and push it along, and you've got that thing too vertical, that wheel's going to try to do like a shopping cart, you know, do all that stuff. But if you lean it back and you give it more positive caster and push it, it's nice and straight. Well, the one that we were talking about was too easy to drive. It was just all over the road. That's what they kept saying, though. You know, their favorite thing to say is it's all over the road. But what would happen was when you would turn the wheels, it would dart. Well, they had put tires on it, and they did an alignment, and their machine had it right up in the middle of the green. Well, I had to actually increase the caster and keep it in the green, but make it more positive in order for that car to drive the way it was supposed to. So if you put additional positive caster on there, you're going to do better. All right. Here's your steering axis and your zero reference. See your positive caster load projection is down that way. So basically, it's going to be more prone to return to the center. Because whenever you've got your more positive caster, when you turn your wheels one way or another, and it goes off to the left, it's going to pick the car up. You turn it back to the right, it's going to go down, and then you turn it back to and it's going to go up on both sides. So it's always going to be to the place where it's the lowest. That's what caster is all about. I smell bell pepper or something. What's this? All right. Okay. This is negative caster load projection. See that? Now remember, negative caster, if it's enough, will cause a pull as well. So if you've got a little bit of positive camber, a little bit of negative caster on the same wheel on the front, you're going to wind up having a pull. All right. Now this is this caster table with positive caster right here, which is sort of silly. You know, but there's your load projection right there. See how whenever you're pushing that thing, this one right here will typically track really well. Now that's not really a good way to put that. I mean, the snap-on guy teaches it a lot better. And that's like negative caster. If the load projection is behind the tire, it's negative caster. If it's in front of the tire, that doesn't really illustrate what I was trying to do. What I was doing is like, if you hold this stem back and you push those wheels, they're going to stay straight. But if you're holding it up too much, they're going to sort of be squirrely. That's what was going on with that Crown Victoria with that squirrely driving. All right, see this? what you got right here. The direction of pull's that way. Which side's got the most positive caster? The side that is not where it's pulling. You get me? So if you've got negative caster, more negative on that side than this side, and there's a pretty good bit of difference between those, it's going to pull toward the direction of negative caster. Just remember that. Okay, there's your steering axis at 0 caster. There it is at positive caster. See how that changes things? All right, camber changing on turn as a result of positive caster. See that, the way that does? And then you got you some camber there too. Going else. Have you ever noticed how if you're sitting there, you look at a car that's got the wheels turned all the way one way, it looks like the wheel's kind of crooked. You know what I mean? This is related to alignment angles and all that. All right, in addition to this, there's your scrub radius. See that? You got, I mean, not scrub radius, I'm sorry, scrub radius is something else. But you basically, if you've got it to where it's not right, you can see how it's going to scrub. Something else that makes it scrub is when your toe is not right. It'll just scrub the rubber right off those tires. All right, there's your load shoulder shifting from the center of the tire to the shoulder. See how all this stuff changes everything? Positive and negative. Positive camber, negative camber. On that side, because it's leaning out away from the car, it's positive, and in spite of the fact this was leaning the same way, it's negative because it's leaning in toward the car because of the shift of the load. See, there's your toe in and toe out. Okay, now everybody needs to be able to remember this well enough to where they can describe it and understand it. If you measured it in inches, this is what you would do. What we would always do is take the wheels and jack them up a little bit and set a can of yellow paint right in front of the tire, and then spin the tire and just pull the trigger on that spray gun. You got a yellow stripe all the way around the tire, and then you get this little point. It's basically you run up against there and you scratch that paint so that you've got a line through the middle of that yellow paint that you put around the center of the tire, and then you can actually take a tape measure and measure from the front of the tire, you know, the mark on the front of each tire to the one on the back, and then you're going to adjust it so that they're like they're supposed to be. You can do that with a tape measure if you're just trying to do it at home. I knew this one guy at home that did his with a yardstick, you know, and it went straight down the road. But there's your, and you can also look at your caster is the only thing you can't measure with stuff you've got at the home. If you've got a carpenter's level and you can get it set up so that it's measuring that rim the right way, you can actually check your caster with that. I mean, camber with that. Now, caster's got to be checked a different way. All right, your center line is right there. You got degrees too, see? That's the two ways you're going to look at. You can look at inches or degrees. We don't use the stick with the 2 pointers on it anymore, although it's not a bad idea to understand what you're doing. Understanding wheel alignment is really good. There's your 0 toe right there with the thrust line going through the middle of the car. All right, there's your toe wear. Have you ever seen this where you drag your hands across the tire and you feel like it's feathered? You got to make sense? That's basically because the tire is dragging down the road with it, you know, it's always taking rubber off and it's taking it off in that direction. Now there's your radial tire wear. It's basically more prone on a radial to wear this way than it is on the old bias belted tire, which you don't see bias belted tires anywhere anymore except on trailers. You know what I mean? All right. 0 toe would be straight ahead, toe out. Now you're going to have, on front wheel drive cars, you're going to toe them out just a little bit, because what happens when you're giving it the gas, it's going to pull in. You got me? On front wheel drive cars, you're going to toe them in just a little bit, because when you're pushing it down the road, it's going to push them out. That makes sense? You got me? So you're going to toe them out a little because it's going to pull in when you're pulling. You're going to toe them in a little if it's rear wheel drive, because it's going to push them out while it's going down the road. And that's what toe in and toe out's for. All right. Your non-adjustable angles. Why do we need to toe out on turns? How many of you guys know what toot is? T-O-O-T, toe out on turns. I just said it. Got me? Okay, so what toe out on turns is all about, if this inside tire is making a tighter circle, it better be turning sharper than this one, shouldn't it? If that one is making a sharper turn going the other way, and it is, because it's making a smaller circle. That makes sense? So you got toe out on turns. If I see something in, if I put something in a quick test that says what's toot, all right, your center line, less than, see that? Check and turning angle for left front wheel and right front wheel. You're basically, what you're wanting to do is you want to turn it and make sure that you've got a little bit of toe out on turns on those plates over there. You can do that if you decide you want to. All right, now remember, these are non-adjustable angles. This is something you cannot change. but it has to be built into the steering system. What would change it? What would change it? Anybody know? Something bent. Something bent or messed up would change it. Like if you ran into something and it could actually bend some of the steering components. That's one of the reasons it's really important when you're doing an alignment that you check the air pressure on the tires and you look at all your steering components first before you do anything else, so you'll know that there's nothing worn out under there, because you can't line something up that's got a bunch of wore out parts under it. There's your steering axis inclination. Remember this, you're going to have to draw a picture of this on one of your tests. You better remember it. Steering axis inclination is extremely important to understand. That's the line going through your ball joint or the center of your strut. If it's got those McPherson strut like that, on your Honda cars like I was talking about, it still has two ball joints in spite of the fact that it's strut. The strut is actually a fixed unit. It doesn't turn. The tire turns on its ball joints on those Hondas. They don't have that illustrated up here. And so steering axis inclination is how far off of center that line is. That is really important. You can measure that with our machine, but you cannot adjust it. Included angle has got to do with your camber, and in other words, if you basically took how much your camber is and how much your steering axis inclination is and see what they are, that's your included angle, and it's all based off the center line. Now, don't get too intimidated by this stuff, because your machine's going to tell you a heck of a lot. There's your steering axis inclination, zero reference, your camber line. You have positive scrub radius. That's when you're turning the wheel, how the tire is just scrubbing on there. One of the things that can change scrub radius is if you've got these offset rims that make the tires stick out farther, you know what I'm saying, and how they scrub when they turn, you're basically wanting them to have that load in the middle. Look at that. If you got your camber there, you got a, if that's offset, you've got a scrub radius that's on the outside of the tire. Negative scrub radius. Now, this is the stuff that you, it's kind of like your, and this is setback. You understand what setback is all about. Setback means this wheelbase will be shorter on one side of the car than the other. What can change that? Sorry about that.
Size of tire.
Well, no. I mean, look at it. The wheelbase meaning where the tire is actually touching. The wheelbase is where the tire is touching the pavement at the very bottom, measured from there to the back where it's touching the pavement. You know, and that's basically related to what? Caster, right? Wouldn't caster change that? Or wouldn't hitting something and bending something out of line change that? You know, you got some setback. That is a measurement right there. Now, some cars will have a little bit of setback built into them. Okay, there's your McPherson strut mounting assembly and your top nut. Whenever you guys, there's a worksheet I give out where you guys are supposed to take a strut apart and put it back together using the spring compressor and all that. It's totally safe to do it if you pay attention to what you're doing and all that. Now, I always watch that. Well, there was one guy that I had in here that just dodged that worksheet, never did it. And in the following semester, he had to pull a strut off to get to a timing belt on a PT Cruiser. And because he never did the worksheet the previous semester, he just put an impact wrench on that top nut in the middle and went, wow, and it comes apart up under the car. I'm sorry. It wasn't a big deal. It wasn't a big deal, but when we managed to put it back together, but it made it look dumb. Because what you're supposed to do if you're going to take the strut off is you take these three little bolts off, and the ones on the bottom, you got it in your hand. You're going to unhook some of the brake line stuff and, you know, ABS, all that kind of stuff. All right, front wheel aligned to vehicle center line. There's your alignment reference. Got it? One of the things that annoys people about setting toe is, and you might have run into this before, when you set toe on one side, you get it right, and then you set toe on the other side, it kind of pushes against the side and gets it out of the line. But you can keep, you know, you got to keep working with it. All right, there's your thrust angle. Remember I told you when the rear axle is crooked under the truck? That's a problem, isn't it? Or under the car. Front wheels have to compensate for the rear axle steer problem, and so you're driving down the road with a crooked steering wheel. And there's your thrust line. See, the thrust line on this one has gone off toward the side, and that's why you're having to drive that way, and you really don't like that. All right. You move the bearing and hub assembly on some of them to do camber adjustments and all. See these shims? This is something, once again, you probably won't ever see this, but if you know, whenever you're getting down and dirty, like you know at your dealership level in these days, whenever this was done, the different thicknesses of shims and everything, they would overlap over combination. See, you turn them this way and that, they would be thinner on one side than the other, and you could actually change that when you had to put it all back together and redo your measurements, and that's a kind of a pain. Now, what you'll see a lot of times, and this is extremely common, is you'll see this cam. What you're gonna do is loosen it up, and when you turn that cam while you're watching that adjustment up front, you're gonna see it change. And that's a good thing, right? All right, there's your Corvette torque control arms and shims. You're not gonna have to fool with that a whole lot around. And then right here we got a tie rod on that little, on the back of the car, there's a tie rod. Like on that little neon out there, it's set up that way. I got brand new ones, so you can just about do it by hand. All right, there's your thrust line and there's your center line. Those are supposed to be tracking. All right. First priority. What is the first priority of any automotive chassis system? What is it? Anybody tell me? We're coming close to the end. I've gone through this pretty quick because I don't like being in here any more than y'all do. Right? Stability and control. Write that on your sheet. Stability and control is the first priority of any automotive chassis suspension system. All right, you got that? Viewed from above the vehicle, what is the imaginary line drawn from the center of the rear axle to the center of the front axle? What is it? What do they call it?
Center line.
Yeah, that is actually the geometric center line. Just write those words down. Okay, now the next question is, what is it that describes the actual direction the rear wheel steer the car? We just talked about that. What is it? The thrust line. Okay. Centerline steering is the answer to this one. It refers to the steering the steering wheel position when the vehicle travels straight ahead. Basically, you can have your toe set wrong and your steering wheel be plumb crooked. It won't wear the tires or nothing, but the steering wheel will have to be crooked going down the road because you didn't line it up. Somebody that forgets to center the steering wheel and lock it in place, and they make their toe adjustments, they'll have a crooked steering wheel, and that's bad news. On some of the old ones, like these '91 Dodge Ram that's just got one big tie rod going from the front to front, you're supposed to line them up so they're right, and then take the steering wheel off and put it straight on there, which is a crazy way to do it. And if you've done that going down the road, it's not a good thing to do, to pull a steering wheel off while you're driving. Okay. Okay. This is what's an imaginary line drawn from the center of the rear axle to the front? Remember that? You got that? What is it? You got center line and thrust line, right? That's the geometric center line. We're going to call it that. Okay, and what's illustrated above is the thrust line. Okay. Now this one right here, look at the top one. The one on the left. That is a negative thrust angle. Whenever it's pushing off to the left side, that's negative. Okay, and the next one's positive thrust angle, and the thrust angle is 0 on the third one. And a thrust condition always causes what? Makes it go crooked, makes it dog track going down the road, right? All right, we're almost done here. Never perform a front wheel drive only alignment on any vehicle because it's impossible to know if the front wheels are parallel to the rears. That means don't just hang your front sensors thinking you're going to get good stuff out of that, because you need to know how them all. Okay, an optimum test drive, and this is the last question here, is going to be, you're going to go on a relatively flat, straight section to check for pull, wander, steering wheel position. You're going to go from a stop-start area to check for brake and pull, torque steer, and shock compression and recovery. Shock compression and recovery is what? If I hit the brakes and a shock, they're worn out anyway. All right, a dip and a bump to check for bump steer, bottom, and vehicle stability. Like if you go over a bump and it tries to jerk you off the road. And then a right turn and a left to check for steering, return, and body sway. Everybody got that? In other words, you're going to be doing that and you're going to see it. Body sway is caused by what? What if you got your sway bar links that have come loose? And that happens on these. Your sway bar link is actually going to make it drive a whole lot different. Years ago, my dad and I built this buggy. Well, I actually built a Volkswagen. It was a 58 model. I put an engine in it and all that kind of stuff. Got it going, and it drove terrible. And I came back and asked my dad, why does this car drive so bad? Because it doesn't have a sway bar on the front of it. He said, if you'll take the front axle out of that 64 model down there and put under it, you'll have it. And I did, and it drove like a Porsche. And I learned that day why you need a sway bar. You know what I mean? So, all right. All right, everybody get everything you